What I'm going to do today is just introduce e-invoicing in Ireland and our approach to the European directive. So for some people that will be a reintroduction because some people may have heard it before, others they'll be hearing it for the first time. And I think it's important. It doesn't really matter how immersed you are in e-invoicing. It's always good to just recap on the basics of what the directive says and what the approach is in Ireland. So collectively as a group here today, we're able to establish a basis of common understanding on which we can build on more information layered by our experts from the CEF Digital team, the OGP sourcing team, and then with rich examples like Cornelis has given already, but also from Sweden and also from Ireland, our Irish example as well. So really, in implementing e-invoicing in Ireland, we are standing on the shoulders of giants. E-invoicing has, as Cornelis demonstrated earlier, really been around Europe for a long while. And it was Michel Barnier in 2013, 6 years ago, who envisaged this idea of a connected Europe through e-procurement with e-invoicing as a key enabler for that. And it's really part of the European overall goal to move towards this digital single market. And it resonates very strongly with what we're trying to do in government in Ireland when we talk about innovation, digitisation, automation, as is apparent in our public service 2020 framework. Really, e-invoicing speaks to all of that. So just to have a quick look at the European directive, it's actually a very straightforward directive. It simply requires that member states ensure that all public bodies, so all contracting authorities and contracting entities, are able to receive and process electronic invoices which comply with the European standard on electronic invoicing. So that means if somebody tries to send you an electronic invoice that doesn't comply with the standard, you are not obliged under the directive to receive and process it. Like all good directives, they've given us a compliance deadline, and for central government, that is the 18th of April 2019, next month, and for sub-central, April 2020. And it is envisaged that the transposition of the legislation of the directive into Irish legislation will allow for that sub-central option. So when the European Commission, or when Europe adopted the directive, Ireland decided to have a look at it, and a report was commissioned, and the report found that well in excess of 4 million invoices are processed annually throughout the public service, and 90% of that is paper-based. So if you want to quantify that, our experts tell us that that accounts to 3.5 times the size of the Dublin Spire. So you can imagine that volume, that administrative burden on staff that have to deal with it, of whom there are a number of accounts payable people in the room today. And if you've ever sat near or close to that team, the burden on them, particularly around prompt payment timelines, is literally palpable. Not to mind also the impact of that volume of paper on the environment. So e-invoicing really offers the opportunity to take the paper out of it, to realise cost efficiencies, to improve our resources, processing invoices, and to look at the information in a much more transparent way. So to look at our data and to understand where we're buying, who we're buying from, what we're buying, and to analyse that data to understand how we can buy better, how we can spend public money better. But the rest of the team will go into more of the benefits later. So key points to take away, to remember, to keep in mind as we go through more detail later on in relation to the directive. It applies to all public bodies, and it applies to invoices relating to contracts above EU thresholds. But as Declan and Cornelis were talking earlier, we are encouraging bodies to not necessarily differentiate. Where you're accepting for one, you may as well really accept for them all. And I think the other key point to note there is that you may be availing of a shared contract that is over EU thresholds, which may bring an obligation on you to receive invoices relating to those contracts. So that's just something to be mindful. There is one exemption, and that is to contracts declared secret or accompanied by special security measures, usually sort of defence-type invoices. There is no requirement in Ireland for suppliers to submit e-invoices at this time. So some countries are using the European directive to mandate suppliers to send. In Ireland, we're not. And as I mentioned, there is the compliance date of April 2019 for central government, and sub-central are April 2020. And just to recap that, the obligation is on public bodies to receive and process electronic invoices which comply with the standard. So when I say electronic invoicing, and obviously that's what we're all here today, but what are we really talking about when we're talking about electronic invoicing? Well, the term refers to everything. So everything from a PDF sent in an email to more automated services where you can extract data fields and maybe input them into part of your systems, but with a certain level of automation, to what Cornelius pointed to earlier had been done across different countries across Europe, where they adopted a standardized approach. And that worked very well for suppliers sending invoices to buyers within their own country. But when they started to have to send to other countries, it became more difficult and the benefits were diluted. So we have arrived at the European directive, and it is really about creating a standardized, connected and interoperable approach across the whole of Europe for suppliers sending e-invoices in a standardized way to public bodies. So at a very basic layman's perspective, the European standard is a data model. And it prescribes the content of an electronic invoice, and it prescribes the format. So from a content perspective, you're looking at core invoice elements. And from a formatting perspective, you're looking at one of two XML formats. And that's the basics. Gorg, as Declan said later, will go into it in more detail. But at a very top level, they're the basics. The standard doesn't prescribe how electronic invoices should be sent, so how they are transmitted. In Ireland, we have chosen the PEPL e-delivery network. PEPL is the Pan-European Public Procurement Online e-delivery network for the transmitting of e-procurement documents, including e-invoices. So this is basically the network across which electronic invoices are sent. And the reason why we chose PEPL in Ireland is it allows suppliers to connect once and to connect to all public administrations on the network. So that's where you're really bringing down the trade barriers. How do you get connected to the network? Well, the supplier engages with an e-invoice service provider, and they provide connection to an access point. At the same time, the contracting authority, be it a shared service or be it a public body, connects through a e-invoicing service provider to an access point on the network. And the e-invoices are pushed through what we call a four-corner model. And that's the basics of how it works. From an Irish perspective, we are leading with a shared services coordinating facility approach in Ireland. So in eInvoicing Ireland, we have partnered with our 4 sector partners and shared services throughout each of those sectors. So in health, we're working with the HBS. In education, we're working with the ESBS, who have already established an e-invoicing solution, which you're going to hear about later on today. We're also working with the LGMA, who are piloting a project with a number of their regional and local authorities. And we're also working with the FMSS in central government. But I think, we also obviously recognise that not every public body is covered yet by a shared service. So there are public bodies who are going to be looking to reach compliance for themselves as individual organisations. And we've very much taken that into consideration in planning the framework. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what eInvoicing Ireland as a programme is all about, we are in establishment about 19 months now, and we have two main streams of work. The first is communications. So we communicate with our stakeholders, of whom you're all included, public sector bodies. Service providers are another key stakeholder, as are suppliers. And really, regardless of what area you're coming from, there is sort of a three-stage approach to e-invoicing. First, it's to become aware of the directive and the obligations. Second is to reach an understanding of what that means for your organisation. And thirdly is to plan and act and take action towards e-invoicing implementation, which by the end of today, I'm hoping everybody in the room will be ready to start taking action for the compliance timelines. On the other work stream, we have been working with OGP Sourcing and our 4 sector partners to establish a framework, which Derek is going to go through in detail later on. But I think the key points of that are to note that the framework provides services both for shared services, but also for transitioning public bodies and independent public bodies. It provides compliant solutions, and it also provides solutions that will enable basic compliance as well as more integrated solutions. And I leave Derek to tell you the good news about when that's going to be available. So from an implementation perspective, and I'm going to speed up now because I know we're running slightly behind, and I'm hoping to catch up. But really what we're encouraging everybody in the room is to think about e-invoicing from a change management perspective. Yes, you can look at it from a compliance perspective, but you can also look at it and say, what are the obligations? What is the current invoice processing environment like in my organisation? Who are the teams involved? And how can we work to make it better? How can we start to rethink our data, our systems, our processes to really take advantage of e-invoicing, to develop a strategy for each of our organisations and to go forth with that strategy to procure and then work with e-invoicing service providers to implement the e-invoicing that we need to work for us and for our systems and our people and our suppliers. And there are copies of the implementation pyramid online and also here today. So really what we're talking about is better outcomes for government, and we hear a lot about that in different guises, but e-invoicing really offers us that opportunity now, and as Paul said earlier, we're really encouraging everybody around the room to grasp that opportunity, because it's also a real opportunity for suppliers to connect to public administrations across Europe and public bodies on the network, and to really bring down those trade barriers. And there are numerous advantages to it.